Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost of the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. But I doesn't go far, or she'd a sent for me. And when it was late in the day, the people all went. And then I come in and told her the noise and shooting waked me and Sid, and the door was locked. And we wanted to see the fun, so we went down the lightning rod, and both of us got hurt a little. And we didn't never want to try that no more. And then I went on and told her all what I told Uncle Silas before. And then she said she'd forgive us, and maybe it was all right enough anyway. And about what a body might expect of boys, for all boys was a pretty harum-scarum lot of fur, as she could see. And so, as long as no harm hadn't come of it, she judged better put in her time being grateful we was alive. And well, and she had us still, instead of fretting over what was past and done. So then she kissed me, and patted me on the head, and dropped into a kind of a brown study, and pretty soon she jumps up and says, "Why, loss a mercy, it's most night, and Sid not come yet. What has become of my boy?" Of that boy, excuse me. I see my chance, so I skips up and says, "I'll run right uptown and get him," I says. "No, you won't," she says. "You'll stay right where you are. One's enough to be lost at a time. If he ain't here to supper, your uncle'll go." Well, he warn't there to supper, so right after supper Uncle went. He had come back about 10 a little bit uneasy, hadn't run across Tom's track. Aunt Sally was a good deal uneasy, but Uncle Silas, he said there wasn't no occasion to be. Boys will be boys, he said, and you'll see this one turn up in the morning all sound and right, so she had to be satisfied. But she said she'd set up for him a while anyway, and keep a light burning so he could see it. And then when I went up to bed, she come up with me, and fetched her candle and tucked me in and mothered me so good I felt mean, and like I couldn't look her in the face, and she sat down on the bed and talked with me a long time, and said what a splendid boy Sid was, and didn't seem to want to ever stop talking about him, and kept asking me every now and then if I reckoned he could get a lost hurt, or maybe drowned it, and might be laying at this minute somewhere, suffering or dead, and she not by him to help him. And so the tears would drip down silent, and I would tell her that Sid was all right, and would be home in the morning, sure. So that she would squeeze my hand or maybe kiss me, and tell me to say it again, and keep on saying it, because it done her good, and she was in so much trouble. And when she was going away, she looked down in my eyes so steady and gentle, and says, "The door ain't going to be locked, Tom, and there's the window and the rod, but you'll be good, won't you? And you won't go for my sake?" Laws knows I wanted to go bad enough to see about Tom, and was all intending to go. But after that I wouldn't have went, not for kingdoms. But she was on my mind, and Tom was on my mind, so I slept very restless. And twice I went down the rod away in the night, and slipped around front, and see her sitting there by her candle in the window, with her eyes towards the road and the tears in them. And I wished I could do something for her, but I couldn't, only to swear that I wouldn't never do nothing to grieve her any more. And the third time I waked up at dawn and slid down, and she was there yet, and her candle was most out, and her old gray head was resting on her hand, and she was asleep. Chapter 42. The old man was uptown again before breakfast, but couldn't get no track of Tom, and both of them sat at the table thinking, and not saying nothing, and looking mournful, and their coffee getting cold, and not eating anything. And by the old man says, "Did I give you the letter?" "What letter?" "The one I got yesterday out of the post office." "No, you didn't give me no letter." "Well, I must have forgot it." So he rummaged his pockets, and then went off where he had laid it down, and fetched it, and give it to her. She says, "Why, it's from St. Petersburg. It's from Sis." I allowed another walk would do me good, but I couldn't stir. But before she could break it open, she dropped it run, for she sees something. And so did I. It was Tom Sawyer on a mattress, and that old doctor and Jim in her calico dress, with her hands tied behind him, and a lot of people. I hid the letter behind the first thing that come handy and rushed. She flung herself at Tom, crying, and says, "Oh, he's dead, I know he's dead." And Tom turned his head in a little and muttered something or other, which showed he warn't in his mind. Then she flung up her hands and says, "He's alive, thank God!" And that's enough. And she snatched a kiss of him and flew for the house to get the bed ready, and scattering orders right and left at the blacks and everybody else, as fast as her tongue could go every jump of the way. I followed the men to see what they was going to do with Jim, and the old doctor and Uncle Silas followed after Tom into the house. The men was very huffy, and some of them wanted to hang Jim for an example to all the other blacks around there, so they wouldn't be trying to run away like Jim Dome and making such a raft of trouble, and keeping a whole family scared most to death for days and nights. But the others said, "Don't do it. It wouldn't answer at all. He ain't our black, and his owner would turn up and make us pay for him, sure." So that cooled them down a little, because the people that's always the most anxious for to hang a black that ain't done right, just right, is always the ones that ain't the most anxious to pay for him when they've got their satisfaction out of him. They cussed Jim considerable, though, and give him a cuff or two side the head once in a while, but Jim never said nothing. He never let on to know me, and they took him to the same cabin and put his own clothes on him and chained him again, and not to no bed like this time, but to a big staple drove into the bottom log and chained his hands too, and both legs, and said he warn't to have nothing but bread and water to eat after this till his owner come, or he was sold at auction, because he didn't come in a certain length of time and filled up our hole, and said a couple of farmers with guns must stand watch around the cabin every night, and a bulldog tied to the door in the daytime, and about this time they was through with the job and was tapering off with a kind of general goodbye cussing. And then the old doctor comes and takes a look and says, "Don't be no rougher on him than you're obliged to, because he ain't a bad black. When I got to where I found the boy, I see I couldn't cut the bullet out without some help, and he weren't in no condition for me to leave to go and get help. He got a little worse and a little worse, and after a long time he went out of his head, and he wouldn't let me come any more, and said if I chalked his raft he'd rather kill me, and no end of wild foolishness like that. And I see I couldn't do anything at all with him, so I says, I got to have help somehow. And the minute I says it out, crawls this black from somewheres, and says he'll help, and he done it too, and done it very well. Of course, I judged he must be a runaway black, and there I was, and there I had to stick right along the rest of the day and all night. It was a fix, I tell you. I had a couple of patients with the chills, and of course, I'd like to run up to town and see them, but I dashn't, because the black might get away, and then I'd be to blame, and yet never a skiff come close enough for me to hail. So there I had to stick plumb until daylight this morning, and I never see a black that was a better nuss or faithfuller, and yet he was risking his freedom to do it, and was all tired out too. And I see plain enough he'd been worked main hard lately. I liked the black for that. I tell you, gentlemen, a black like that is worth $1,000, and kind treatment too. I had everything I needed, and the boy was doing as well there as he would have done at home. Better, maybe, because it was so quiet, but there I was, both of 'em on my hands, and there I had to stick till about dawn this morning. Then some men in a skiff come by, and as good luck would have it, the black was setting up by the pallet with his head propped on his knees sound asleep, so I motioned them in quiet, and they slipped up on him and grabbed him and tied him before he knowed what he was about, and we never had no trouble. And the boy being in a kind of a flighty sleep too, we muffled the oars and hitched the raft on, and towed her over very nice and quiet, and the black never made the least row nor said a word from the start. He ain't no bad black, gentlemen. That's what I think about him. Somebody says, "Well, it sounds very good, Doctor, I'm obliged to say." Then the others softened up a little too, and I was mighty thankful to that old doctor for doing Jim that good turn, and I was glad it was according to my judgment of him too, because I thought he had a good heart in him and was a good man for the first time I see him. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.